My name's Peter D. Gulch. I've lived in Camden, New Jersey all my life, and in 3 months I'll be 71 years old. Well, the first music that I listened to and that I became an avid fan of was classical music. And I recall the very first album that I bought of classical music was Beethoven's Sixth Symphony to Pastoral. And I bought that in an Acme for like 59 cents. Well, back then. Well, I think I was like 13 years old or something. And then I continued listening to classical music for many years. And then, of course, as I was getting older, I started listening to just, regular rock type music. I guess I listened to rock not quite as much as classical, but I sort of built up a little library of it. And, it was typical rock bands at the time, like Canned Heat, Blue Cheer, stuff like that. And then, of course, that was leading up to whatever happened with the introduction to electronic music. And the electronic music, the very first thing that I heard that really made an impact on me was an album by Klaus Schulze. It had two selections on it, which were pretty lengthy. One of them was Neurongesang, and the other was Irrlicht. And I don't know whether that was a double album or a single, but I didn't have the album. My brother had bought it, and he let me listen to it, and immediately I was enamored or captured with the sound. It was something like totally different, but it really struck a chord in me, which it's difficult to explain. Why does one person like this and not another thing? But that particular music, that particular selection really made an impact on me. And that was my introduction to electronic music. And then, of course, right at the time that Klaus Schulze was doing that and Tangerine Dream were, forming, they started putting out electronic music and, early Phaedra and stuff like that, and started listening to a whole lot more of that as it became available. Now, at the time, it was very difficult to even find that type of music. And I recall the only place, to my knowledge at that time, was a record shop on 3rd Street. And down in the basement or on the 2nd floor, I forget where it was, there was a small selection of records that were coming over from Europe with, Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream, Richard Pinhas, and started collecting anything we could get our hands on, because now I really liked the electronic music a lot, the sound of it. But then we reached a point where there was no more new stuff coming over, because at that time all this was brand new, and there was no way to get any other electronic music other than that little store that I knew of. It was a completely different situation than like today. But that was the impetus to go out and say to ourselves, well, I'm talking about myself and my brother, we like this so much, we really want to do, have more of it, so let's try to do it ourselves. Well, I believe that I first heard the Irrlicht album. Well, Irrlicht was one of the selections on it. I think that was in the 70s, the late 70s. And once again, as I mentioned, my brother had the album. I'm not sure where he got it, except he probably got it at 3rd Street. But when I listened to that, and I listened to it quite a number of times, not just, you know, one introduction listening and put it aside, but those particular selections on that album, just it was almost like, you know, you were searching for something, or, you know, your psyche, or whatever you want to call it, needed something different or whatever. And when I heard that music, it wasn't because it was produced electronically. It wasn't because he was using synthesizers or whatever. It was just that particular timbre, tonality, the way that thing droned on. It just did something for me and made me feel really, really good. Well, once we discovered, or my brother discovered, you know, that there was such a thing as electronic music albums that were being produced with, you know, early synthesizers. When we went over to 3rd Street to look at the selections that they had there, one of the things that we would do would be look at what type of instruments they were using. And if we saw that the album was being produced with synthesizers, that became particularly interesting to us because we knew that had a specific type of sound. So that's why we started collecting just about anything that came over that was made with synthesizers. And, you know, we did, over the years that we were collecting that, there were many people nobody had ever heard of from anywhere. But we gave it a shot, you know, try it out, listen to it, see what it was like, and it just furthered our interest in electronic music. The number of albums coming over seemed to have diminished, and, you know, there was not that much that we could get anymore. And since we liked the particular type of music so much, that was the focal point of saying, let's do this ourselves, let's try to do it ourselves. And that's when we went out and we bought our first analog synthesizers. Well, I believe it would be right at the beginning of the 80s, probably 1980, 1981, somewhere around there. That's probably when we bought the first synthesizer. And of course, the choice was easy at that time because there weren't many synthesizers being manufactured. In fact, we chose a couple small ones to start out with that were being manufactured by Roland. And they had a simple, I believe it was like an SH1 was the designation of it. Simple controls, but enough to learn. You know, when you're starting out small, because at that time, basically, that's all they had out there. And it might be difficult to comprehend, but back in 1980, it was right at the beginning of the wave of what was to come with synthesizers. Well, basically, when you have something brand new and you know absolutely nothing about it, there's only one way you can really learn, and that's to fool with it. And that's what we did. We spent a lot of time, you know, playing with the knobs. And of course, I don't know if there was they probably had a rough manual of what some of the knobs did and stuff, but our method of learning at that time was, here's the instrument, let's see what we can do with it. And just take and, you know, twist the knobs, try sound, see what it does, and learn the machine as best you can. Well, as I mentioned, since it was a Roland corporation and Roland was Japanese, they wrote the manual. The manual was very difficult to understand because it was in sort of like a broken English or whatever you want to call it. The instructions were minimal. Like showing you basically some of the, the way some of the knobs would interact with each other or whatever, but you can just take the manual and throw it away, basically, and then, you sit down and learn the machine. Well, in the very beginning, my brother and I both bought the same synthesizer, and definitely was a collaborative learning experience. And since we were both interested in electronic music and synthesizers, we could pass information back and forth, so I think it expedited the learning process.
Talk about how you went from just learning how to use a synthesizer to realizing a piece of music.
Well, that took a while. That took a couple years. First, learning the machine, what it could do, and then learning music to a certain degree. Because even though, synthesizers can make really interesting sounds and so forth, to be able to put a composition together, at least from my background in classical music, it sort of behooved one to learn some music, traditional music. So there was a learning experience with, basic music theory. And my brother also at the time had started taking classical piano lessons and was being taught by a professional, piano teacher. I think that helped a great deal too. Yeah, well, in the very beginning, my brother and I were experimenting, fooling around with the synthesizers, and basically we were in this room of his house. We weren't even in a garage yet, and by experimenting and trying different things and learning music theory, along with what my brother was doing from the classical keyboard standpoint, we would have sort of like jam sessions, and we would keep trying things and try to play off one another. And that took a little while to develop. I mean, because we were learning this and it was all brand new to us, especially me. I didn't know anything about it at all. Musically, I didn't have any music training. So after we started having these little jam sessions, which we didn't record in the beginning, was just experimentation, but it reached a point where it started to sound interesting, and that was just the learning, the collaborative process, and I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the zeitgeist. But it reached a point where we thought, well, this is starting to sound pretty interesting. Maybe we should set up like a little recorder and record some of this and then listen to it, and then we can critique it or review it or whatever. So at the time, I bought a JVC boombox, pretty big thing, and it had a recorder in it, and it was fairly good quality. So the very first tapes that we released or not released, but the very first tapes that we recorded were done with the JVC by just setting it up in the room, pressing the record button, and then jamming and seeing what happened. Well, as we continued to learn and got good at improvising and collaborating, we started to record the sessions each time that we played or jammed, and we didn't start releasing anything probably until like 1981, I believe it was 1981 or 1982, and we would just take the recording right off the JVC thing, on a cassette tape, and that was the master tape. And that's still the master tape from the JVC recordings. This particular one here, I think this was back in, let's see what the date was here. Yeah, this was 1983.
Can you hold it up so to the camera?
Yeah. This is
Inside.
this is called Energy Transfer, and it's just Maxell tape and, you know, homebrewed cover, and the design on the cover was either produced by me or, you know, a friend of ours, whatever. But that's how we started making these tapes, by taking the jam sessions and then listening to it, and then, you know, maybe truncating it to fit on a tape or whatever. And I believe sometime in the early 80s, there was this Philadelphia Festival of Performing Electronic Musicians Festival. And we were interested in, you know, in that festival, and somebody suggested that maybe we ought to try playing at that festival. So at the time, a friend of ours, well known to you and myself, Charles Cohen, he was in charge of that festival, and we sent him a demo tape. And he listened to it, and he thought it was good enough to come to the festival. Well, after Charles reviewed it and gave us, you know, the okay to come down and try it out, at the time it was just my brother and myself. We went down and we had our very first live concert at that festival, and that was in the early 80s, sometime, something like it. Well, yeah, the first several tapes, I believe, were more like the you know, soundscape, or there wasn't too much melody or, you know, chords and stuff like that. It was mainly like atmosphere type stuff. And it wasn't until after we had a fairly good grasp in music theory and practicing, you know, regular music, that we started to get to the point where we incorporated, you know, rhythms and play and stuff like that. And that took a little while. It took a couple of years before we reached a point where, and you can see it, or you can listen to it on the tapes itself. From the, you know, if you listen to the early tapes, and as time progressed, the structure of the music changed, still incorporating a lot of the soundscape type material, but then began to incorporate more actual music type playing, you know, with sequences and melodies and stuff like that. Well, in order to progress and make the sound more interesting, we had to buy more equipment, because the early synthesizers that were being produced were pretty much very limited in one sense. So in order to get more sounds and layered sounds, we had to acquire more instruments. And due to the limitations of the synthesizers themselves, in order to get a layered structure, we had to acquire more equipment. So as budget and time, you know, allowed, we started to acquire a lot more equipment and incorporate that. You know, first you have to learn the equipment and then incorporate that. And eventually, because of the time period, the early days of synthesizers, in order to get a heavily layered sound, you had to have a barrage of equipment. And eventually, you know, sometime later on, we really had quite a bit of synthesizers and other, you know, sequencer equipment, to the point where, you know, if we were going to perform at a concert, we would have to rent a U-Haul truck to drive it to the concert hall and set up, and, you know, that took a lot of time and effort. Well, the very first concert we did at that festival, it was just my brother and myself. We had practiced, sort of practiced to try to make it a cohesive set, because I think we only were allowed to have 30 minutes or something like that. But we went in there, we got set up, and we were set up sort of at the end of a hallway where there was other musicians in the venue who were already set up. We were set up like at the end. There was quite a bit of people there. There must have been like 100 people, maybe 150 people came to the concert. Both my brother and I were scared shitless. First time in a public performance of any kind, and you don't know what's going to happen, how the people are going to react or whatever. So, I just told my brother, said, look, put all that crap out of your head. We'll just go in there and play, whether they like it or not. That's the way it's going to be. We were nervous, and no question about it. We did, performed our set. We did some really interesting things during the set. One of the things that I remember specifically was I had a microphone running through a vocoder, and I was reading excerpts out of some passage from the Bible. And it came out, the whole thing came out just exactly the way we thought it would be, when we had practiced a little bit. And the people liked it. They thought it was pretty good. Well, the first concert was encouraging in the sense of, we did it. We pulled it off, and it was not too bad. So we didn't go out seeking concerts at that, after that. But now it's sort of psychologically in your mind that, hey, it's not that bad to perform in public, and maybe next time it'll be, we'll be a little less nervous. But as far as the collaboration between my brother and myself doing the music, we were going to go on no matter what happened, because we just loved the music. Well, I think the next step, or major step, that occurred before we started playing more concerts was the addition of Dave Lunt. And Dave Lunt was introduced to my brother and myself through a mutual friend, saying that here was a young man who liked this type of music and was pretty good at playing. And we had a couple jam sessions with him, and he was also like a kindred soul. Just fit in with what we were doing. And at the time, when he first started, he only had one synthesizer that he brought with him to play, different things on. I think it was a Krumar. And after Dave joined us and we became a threesome, that sort of furthered the layering and the interaction to the point where we were more comfortable with the approach to concerts. Of course, I think most of the concerts we did were with Dave, and my brother and I, as far as I recall, we only did that one concert at the Foppen Festival. So the concerts started coming mainly through the efforts of people like yourself at WXPN, saying that, we really like what you're doing, maybe we could have a benefit concert or something to that effect. And that sort of started a ball rolling with a lot of other radio stations in the Delaware Valley sent us requests that they would like to put on a benefit concert. And so that's how the whole concert thing started happening, mainly for benefit concerts for the radio stations. This was the first LP that we produced, Nightcrawlers, and put my glasses on and see what, I forget what year this was. Oh, 1984. In 1984, got together and produced this first album. And on the back, there's you can see there's Tom, myself, and Dave. And why did we why did we make the first Nightcrawler album? I think after having jammed enough with the three of us, Dave, my brother, and myself, and with the concerts that we had done, we thought that we had got to a stage where we would be able to make an album. Because once again, with the background of having listened to an enormous number of electronic music albums from other people, we seemed to be like maybe in a ballpark of where we could actually do that. And I think it was mutually agreed with the three of us that it was time to do an album, and we would like to try it as an experiment. So we went through the process and did the recordings, had it produced, and I think we had, like, in the beginning made like 1,000 copies. They're all gone. There's no more of that.
Remember how long it took to sell all of them? It took quite a while.
Yeah, it took several years, yeah. We went to a professional studio to have it recorded professionally, but the guy that we had chosen, once again, had never heard anything like this at all. So basically, he stayed out of it. We told him, we had most of the stuff down to where we could just record it straight onto the reel-to-reel or whatever. And the only thing that sort of annoyed me in a way was the fact that even though we were pretty good at, doing the music, and he didn't have too much to do with the way it was being produced, at the end, he sort of like wanted to do several of the selections over again. For whatever reason, and that part I didn't like at all. Doing something over and over and over of this type of music, because of the fact that we were so ingrained into live improvisation, which is what I really liked about electronic music and what we were doing. Doing the same thing over and over and over again sort of was annoying, but in order to get it to the point where he thought the sound was top notch, we went and did several takes of it. But surprisingly, the guy, he wasn't there tweaking everything or whatever. We just did the stuff, and then he made some adjustments each time that he wanted us to do it over. And I didn't particularly care about it. I don't like studio work. Never have, and probably never will, even if I had, went back to doing music. I liked the spontaneous jamming. That was the thing that I liked the most. This was the last thing that we did. This was recorded in a bedroom, live jam sessions over a period of time, and it was getting to the point where due to physical problems that my brother was having with his health was deteriorating to the point where it became very difficult for him to play anymore. So this was in 1991, and I believe a year after that we had to disband as the Nightcrawlers because my brother could no longer play. He had very severe osteoarthritis and lost the ability, to play an instrument. Okay, the very last thing that the Nightcrawlers produced, actually we didn't produce it, but it was done by a German company through a gentleman called Mario Schoenwalder, was a double album called Traveling Backwards, double CD album. And this was practically 6 years after we had disbanded. But apparently there was still enough interest in the Nightcrawlers especially over in Europe, to warrant this gentleman putting this out, and this is probably the very last thing that was done until the present day, when we're getting involved in something else. It's got a spacewalk on it, traveling backwards, digitalis. Well, it's got a whole bunch of different things on there, but it's like you're right. It's like a compilation of material from former albums and even some former cassette work.
No, I think what he did was he took all the music from the 3 LPs and stuck them on those 2 albums.
Oh, okay. Those things were extremely rare. There was no scene, as far as I'm concerned. It was just a small, group of people that were interested in this specific type of a sound. Decided every once in a while to have their own concert, however they could get it, and come out and let's all get together and listen to that. Outside of that, there was nothing happening at all. I mean, it was just like either connected with a radio station for people that were interested in that, or that specific genre of music, and outside of radio stations, there was nothing like in newspapers or there was no scene as far as I recall it. It was just a group of people that really enjoyed this type of music, wanted to get together and have a concert. It just hits you, and it does something to you which you can't really explain. I don't think there is an explanation for it, because it's just too many, factors involved. But the people that really enjoy this stuff, it does something for them that no other type of music or, experience does. And that's how it started, and that's the way it ended. It would probably be very difficult for me to articulate it in any other way than what I've already said, because I usually don't examine things to that level. I mean, if I know what happened, and I know that we really like this stuff, and we did concerts, we made tapes, and we really enjoyed it. But that to enter onto like a philosophical level or something like that, I don't think it'd go that deep. It's just like I never sat back and said, well, why do I really enjoy playing this, or why does this particular music attract me, or it's something that I don't think I've ever done.
That is probably the most average thing about you.
No, the only thing I can say as final words to people that are watching this is that listen to some of this music, you'll enjoy it.